Hey, do you know about the caste system of Cybertron during the Age of Rust? You won't if you only watch Transformers Prime, and that is why you wouldn't understand the Decepticon cause. Are the Decepticons just a bunch of evil Cybertronians trying to conquer worlds? Not at all. Did you know that outside of Transformers Prime, there are books and comics that expand the universe and tell you about Cybertron's past? Now and then, Transformers Prime references the material, but you, the viewer, will never get the full picture unless you know the background lore. So here are the sources of this video essay. I have other videos that go more in depth about the sources, such as the chapter-by-chapter summary of Exodus, and the Covenant of Primus' breakdowns by historical ages. The Covenant of Primus is the lore book for Transformers Prime. We will take quotes from The Age of Rust and Earthfall, the section on D16. Then there is Exodus, the first novel connected to Transformers Prime that covers Optimus and Megatron's past, how the war began, and why most Cybertronians left Cybertron, chapters 1 to 15. There are 2 more novels, but they aren't relevant for today's topic, except for one quote in Retribution. The trial scene in Exodus has a comic that takes the text from the book and gives it pictures. I'll be using the comic to show interesting visuals. Transformers Prime Beast Hunters is a comic series focused on the Dinobots and other Autobots left behind on Cybertron to continue to fight against the Decepticons. The events take place during Season 3 of Transformers Prime and connect to Predacons Rising. It shows the dark side of the Autobot cause and light in the Decepticon one. Now I want you to be prepared to rethink how you see Autobots and Decepticons. Here are some quick ideas to start you off. Decepticons have friendships just as dear to them as friendships Autobots have with each other. They want revenge for dead comrades the same way RC does. Autobots and Decepticons have their own terrible people mixed into their ranks. Autobots have killed other Autobots, such as an Autobot cannibal. No, it was not Sunder. Optimus is a moral idol, although he has his own biases, and while Autobots strive to be like him, they are not him and do plenty of immoral things themselves. You should not consider Megatron as a Decepticon cause because he has strayed way too far from it, especially with the purple drugs he has been taking. Most Decepticons in Transformers Prime are selfish and not acting in the name of the cause anymore. The most accurate representations of the Decepticons are Dreadwing and Breakdown. Life was really terrible, Autobots were even hypocritical, and before we start this deep dive, I want you to pay close attention to this quote from this show.
The devastation to our homeworld is worse than I remember. Curse the Autobots to the pit!
Dreadwing blames the Autobots for the destruction, but normally we side with the Autobots and blame the Decepticons. Decepticons are the destructive ones, right? So why does Dreadwing think the bots under Optimus, the figure of goodness, are responsible? Let's take one more step back to address why viewers firmly believe Decepticons are evil. The name, of course. Megatron and Starscream are aware that they are devious and commit some morally questionable acts. The Decepticons we saw in the show showed no qualms about eradicating all life on Earth. Bots like Shockwave took advantage of the war to commit whatever unethical or criminal deeds they wanted. The Decepticons we saw are willing to torture prisoners and then kill them. Transformers Prime gives us a very small Autobot and Decepticon cast, so it is hard to get an accurate idea of what either side is like. We will talk about individuals, like who joined each side and why. Look at Dreadwing for example. Dreadwing represents the original Decepticon cause before it lost its focus. His defection happened when he realized how corrupt his leader had become. But Dreadwing hates the Autobots too much to join them, so he would rather belong to no faction. What we see in Transformers Prime is no longer the real Decepticon cause, but the twisted adventures of Megatron, Starscream, and Shockwave. What they get up to isn't what all Decepticons want, and someone like Soundwave only goes along with it because he is so attached to Megatron that he can't see how insane he has become. Now that you have these concepts in your head, it's time to leave Transformers Prime and explain the past of Cybertron. Cybertron had a caste system. You don't hear that word in the show, but it is the most important thing you need to know. IDW took the same idea for their universe but made it darker. A caste system means each person is assigned a job and a class rank, and they cannot escape them. A bot is created by their godlike creator and rises to the surface of their world. When they come out into the world, someone called a guild master looks at them and decides what that bot will be for the rest of their life. This is largely based on what the bot transformed into. If you were a big strong tank, you would go straight into labor. The caste system is old on Cybertron, but during the Golden Age, Cybertron was forming colonies. If you didn't like your job, you could leave. Things went to shit when Cybertron closed all portals to protect itself from the Rust Plague. Cybertron became this isolated planet that confined each person to their caste. There's also an issue with the creation right now. Because of their ultra-rapid colonization of other worlds that spread out the creational energy of their god, God at home isn't making bots like he used to. Before, people would come out of the holy hole with names and a sense of the world they're coming into. Now, people are being made without names, and they inwardly accept that they can't fight the system. But when bots come out without identities, they seem much more disposable. Welcome to the age of rust, when things get really bad for the people who will form the Decepticon cause. All Cybertronians are created innately good, considering that their creator is good. No Decepticon is created evil, but from the moment they are born, most of them are forced into slave work. This happens in the south of Cybertron in cities such as Kaon, Blaster City, and Slaughter City. The south is a slum full of factories and mining operations. It is heavily polluted, so bad that it damages people's eyes. But that isn't the worst of it. Their work is so dangerous that people get hurt and killed every day making products for the higher caste bots. Nobody cares at all that these bots are dying in the mines and in the factories, never given names or shown love. They're losing eyes, ears, limbs, getting shredded, crushed, melted, and the slaves don't really even realize that they are worth anything. Blaster City is so dangerous that there is a saying that sparks are cheap in Blaster City, meaning that so many nameless bots die in labor that they can't even count how many. All these big strong bots are suffering incredibly, while someone like Little Meek Optimus is living a safe life in the north, in the pretty and calm city of Iacon. He is stuck being an archivist all his life. And while he is very bored, he isn't suffering like the slaves in the south. Nearly everyone except for the ultra-rich are uninspired and tired of life. Once, suicide used to be rare among Cybertronians, but now it is on the rise. People start finding pleasure in more extreme forms of entertainment, and this is how gladiator fights became a thing. You heard Megatron call himself a gladiator in the show, but what did that mean? The dirt poor unnamed boss of the south entered the fight pits, which weren't always to the death but often were. They killed each other for the entertainment of a crowd, and this was most likely voluntary. Why were these slaves volunteering to risk their lives? The biggest reason was because this was the only way to make anyone care about them. Megatron talks about valuing life only as he killed people just like him. Megatron enters the fights under the name Megatronus and becomes famous by constantly winning. That is when people care about what he has to say. Megatron realizes that Cybertron is deeply corrupt, and he encourages other slaves to value themselves and dream of a better life. The North hears Megatron's speeches over the web, and it shakes some and enlightens others. Megatron talks about the caste system's oppression, and Optimus, as Orion Pax, hears it but only thinks of his own boring life. When he contacts Megatron to tell him his words have reached Iacon, Megatron tells him that Orion's life is a dream for slaves who would do anything to have his safe, comfy life in a clean city. You read Exodus, and Orion never grasps how bad life was for Megatron. Optimus used to be bothered by pettier things like not being able to go to the amusement park. Northerners lived in ignorance or simply did not care about the nameless bots making their products. Exodus explicitly points out Jazz as someone who watched an illegal gladiatorial fight in Iacon. Jazz is a classic Autobot character, friendly and upbeat, but he was having a great time cheering as he watched people horrifically murder each other. You know what's worse? Jazz is aware of the horrors of the South, but he doesn't care. With Jazz, I let you know that nearly all Autobots are these Northerners. The Autobots were the middle-class to high-class Cybertronians who took advantage of the slaves and watched them die as entertainment. Are you starting to get why the Decepticons would hate the Autobots? There's even more. The Northerners watched these dirty bots kill each other, and the corpses were taken apart so that the rich could buy their parts. If you were a slave, you didn't get a funeral. Remember how slaves were losing parts and getting eye damage in the South? They would also pick each other apart to fix themselves. There was a whole black market organ trade there in Kaon. Another reason bots could have entered the gladiatorial pits was because it was the only place the slaves could get access to medical care. Pit surgeons like Shockwave are there to fix up gladiators like Megatron, but also to mess with them and make them more powerful. So the slaves were very pressured to risk their lives for money, love, and free healthcare. It's very messed up what it meant to be a gladiator, and now you understand that the true monsters are not the killers in the arenas, but the higher castes making this happen. So Megatron is not just some bot looking for power. He is a deeply damaged individual with a lot of hatred inside him for the higher castes. It is honestly incredible that he is nicer than he should be, befriending a little archivist to teach him about equality. So Transformers Prime starts here with its lore. Ratchet tells a short story about Optimus and Megatron's friendship, but it is a very biased telling that misses a lot of information. Some information is even wrong, which may be the writer's sloppiness, but everything can only be interpreted as Ratchet being biased as hell. The main points are right. Megatron teaches Orion Pax. Both of them promote equality and are against oppression. Then they appear before the High Council to demand change. Ratchet says that Megatron gives a speech about taking political power by force. That is true, but Ratchet says it like it is very evil. Optimus' speech is also about equality, but he suggests a peaceful change in politics. This is presented as the good guy speech that makes Optimus deserve being named the Prime by the High Council. Ratchet says that Megatron is motivated by jealousy and spite, but that puts it lightly and makes it look like Megatron had nothing but greed driving him. He wasn't power hungry, he was a slave fighting for the rights of his people.
Megatron was an Autobot?
Optimus was a con?
No, on either count. But there was a time, back on Cybertron, in the twilight hours of the Golden Age.
The Twilight hours of the Golden Age. Actually, it was during the Age of Rust that Megatronus and Orion started talking. The Golden Age ended with the space bridges exploding and Cybertron isolating itself from the universe. But the thing is, not all bots may recognize that things got so terrible that it ought to be called another age. Ratchet referring to the Age of Rust as the Twilight hours of the Golden Age may be a writing mistake that can be interpreted as not recognizing how terrible life was for other people because Ratchet's life was still good.
When Optimus and Megatron were not sworn enemies. Do you recall when I mentioned that Optimus wasn't always a Prime? Well, he wasn't always Optimus either. He was once a clerk in the Iacon Hall of Records, named Orion Pax. But as he learned more about Cybertron's past, he grew increasingly concerned about the present corruption in high places and inequality among the masses.
Inequality is putting it lightly. There were bots with names who mattered, and there were nameless bots who died either slaving away making products for the rich, or died killing each other for their entertainment. It doesn't take a web search to figure out that this is happening when watching gladiator fights is a common pastime, and the whole South is a polluted hellhole. Everyone should have known the world was messed up, but they just didn't care until Megatron made them care.
Orion became inspired by the words and ideas of a gladiator. One who had named himself after one of the 13 original primes, Megatronus.
Chapters 1 to 3 of Exodus.
Megatronus vowed to challenge Cybertron's leadership and demand that all Cybertronians be treated as equals.
This is entirely true. Megatron spoke on behalf of the nameless bots, and he gained attention by becoming a famous gladiator. If Megatron didn't fight and kill, no one would have noticed him.
This gladiator turned revolutionary rapidly gathered a loyal following.
Megatron killed the crime bosses who ran the gladiator pits in the south and abused the gladiators for money. Megatron took over the pits and stopped the fights once he got the other slaves to join his movement.
Soundwave chief among them.
Soundwave was originally a counselor so disgusted with the other counselors that he left them. He went to Chaos to live among the poor, and he met Megatron in a non-lethal gladiatorial battle. Soundwave cared deeply about the suffering of the slaves, so this is why he is a truly loyal Decepticon. Get ready to love Soundwave, because this is what he said: "I won't stand here pretending to be better than those laboring in the mines and the smelt yards."
Orion began corresponding with Megatronus, who came to be something of a mentor to him.
Orion and Megatron began speaking to each other in messages until Orion visited Megatron for the first time. I'm saying Megatron because very quickly, Megatron switched to his shortened name at the start of the book.
As Megatronus left the gladiatorial arena for the political, he saw fit to shorten his name.
Ratchet is wrong, but may not actually know when Megatron changed his name. Megatron did not choose Megatron over Megatronus, but a chanting crowd did it. Megatron liked having an individual name that packed a punch.
Before long, Megatron appeared before the High Council to propose his vision for a just society. And it was here that he began to reveal his true colors, proclaiming the need to overthrow the old guard with force, and arrogantly demanding to be named the next Prime.
That again makes Megatron sound ultra evil, but when you know just how terrible the High Council was, how it oppressed and killed thousands to millions, yeah, Megatron is right to want to overthrow the old government. How many countries are where they are today because of revolutions? It is very common for governments to be forcefully overthrown when the people have had enough. And when we read stories about them, we see what they did as heroic. Why does Transformers Prime tell us to call these terribly oppressed people evil for resorting to violence? Of course they would resort to violence after everything they suffered. They were never heard or valued before, and so they had to do things like acts of terrorism just like the past revolutions on Earth. Who expects that the poor in the French Revolution would let King Louis stay in power over France just because he apologized? The government would get to keep control over people they gave no shits about, and they don't get punished at all. Megatron has every reason to hate these assholes, and he can only trust a lower caste bot like himself to make certain that his people will get treated right. So before the court scene, you should know that there are a series of terrorist bombings on places like the amusement park and the homes of artists in Polyhex. Megatron denies ordering these attacks, but we assume he is full of crap because he takes the opportunity to justify the attacks. When you read stuff like that, it's chilling. The rage is so justified and would be seen as heroic if we didn't come into Transformers with this bias that Decepticons are the evil ones.
But Orion did not believe in violence as a means of achieving justice. The sparks and minds of the Council were moved by Orion's words.
That is true. Orion delivered a speech about a peaceful shift in political power. Optimus deserves to be a prime, but Ratchet describes this scene as a very emotional, touching moment. It isn't really because the Council are undoubtedly bad people, some worse than others, but of course they would prefer Optimus's speech because he promotes a peaceful change in politics. That protects them. They don't like the idea of being forcefully overthrown, and even before Megatron's speech, they hated him. They were biased and classist. When they started talking to Megatron, they made a big deal out of him choosing a name when he wasn't given one by Primus. Here are some points Megatron made during his speech while describing his past life.
Here, for the first time since Cybertron's golden age, stood someone worthy of being a prime.
So the Council names Optimus a prime in this scene. This is what Smokescreen refers to in New Recruit. He's talking about how Alvatrion told Halogen, one of the Council members, to name Orion Optimus Prime.
I mean, he was the one who petitioned Halogen and the High Council to make you a prime.
But that honor could only truly be achieved by earning the legendary Matrix of Leadership.
Optimus is only a true prime when he goes to the core during the war. Primus approves him and gives him the Matrix.
His ambitions thwarted, Megatron spitefully severed all ties with Orion and the Council, and came to wage war on all who opposed him through his growing army of followers, which he named Decepticons.
His ambitions thwarted, that completely ignores everything Megatron went through. Severed ties with the Council sounds like they had a relationship before, but the Council was a bunch of classist asses who were incredibly rude to Megatron and didn't care about people suffering until they themselves were in danger. Oh, and how can we overlook spitefully? Spitefully, as though the Decepticon cause is just a bunch of petty people, not people who had no rights while people like Ratchet did.
He vowed to claim the Matrix for himself, wherever it might lie. In time, warfare consumed Cybertron.
More biased language that sets up Megatron as an ambitious evil tyrant that is far from what he was at the start.
Poisoning the planet to its core. Orion journeyed there, hoping to reverse the ill effects, and found himself before the very spark of our life-giver, Primus himself.
This is the end of Exodus when the Decepticons try to create more dark energon, but then accidentally poison Primus. Optimus goes to the core, and Primus gives him the Matrix. Alright, now that we have covered that, let's go back to Megatron turning on Optimus. Why is Megatron so crazy about Optimus and so set on killing him himself? There are many reasons. Here are a few quotes from the Covenant of Primus describing how Megatron is motivated from rage and pain. First, it starts with Megatron being forced into slavery by the current Prime of Cybertron managing the caste system. Now when Optimus becomes a Prime and Megatron sees it as a grab for power, he is reminded of Sentinel Prime, his old oppressor. Now here is a description of how vengeance for all his past suffering drives Megatron. Megatron does have jealousy issues with the Data Clerk, a middle-class bot getting picked over him to be a Prime. Megatron built a whole revolution and had to risk his life to do it. He taught people like Orion about oppression because they were too dumb to realize what was happening to other people. Orion learned everything he knew from Megatron, but when Orion showed up to the court, he was the one who got rewarded. Orion didn't do anything in comparison to Megatron for promoting equal rights. This is why Megatron lost his mind. After Optimus is named Prime, Megatron accuses Optimus of always wanting power. He legitimately did not think Optimus was a genuine person who cared about Megatron or his people. Megatron believes that Optimus will just keep the current leaders in power and not change the system to give rights to Megatron's people. So let's continue on to other characters, with a bunch of slaves revolting in the south that threatens the everyday lives of the middle class bots. We get a mention in Exodus of an amusement park employee joining the Autobots because his park got bombed. For all the middle class people who didn't care about the slaves, they're like, holy crap, these uneducated brutes are turning violent and they're going to attack us. They side with the fellow middle class bot Orion, who says things should change peacefully because that protects them from a bunch of angry hulking slaves. This includes bots like Ratchet, RC, Wheeljack, and Ultramagnus, who are no-nonsense, cons are evil believers. Bulkhead used to work in construction, but he acts differently than Breakdown, and the Covenant of Primus describes him doing wrecker law enforcement work long before the Age of Rest. He was not a Southerner, even if he did construction work in his time. Bumblebee and Smokescreen were created during the war and were raised to be Autobots. For the Decepticons, the slaves and gladiators obviously joined, which may include Breakdown. Shockwave is there to experiment on bots, but what about Starscream? Well, Starscream was part of the higher caste as a military commander. Seekers joined the Decepticons because Starscream did. Starscream didn't care about the slaves, but he did want Cybertron to change. Other Seekers like Dreadwing, however, cared very much about the Decepticon cause when they joined it. Very few Seekers sided with the Autobots. Early on, the aerial bots such as Silverbolt joined them, whilst Jetfire switched to the Autobots later. We aren't sure what Knockout's intention in joining the Decepticons was, and he might not know himself, but you see that our main Transformers Prime cast does not include the original slave rebels. We have Megatron, sure, but Megatron is driven mad by a want for revenge and all the dark energon he has been eating and stabbing himself with. Soundwave blindly follows Megatron because he believes Megatron can do no wrong. Starscream is trying to seize power and rule over revived Cybertron. Knockout is there for the ride. Arachnid just wants to hurt people. These aren't the people who were fighting for their rights. Breakdown was likely a former Southerner because he's very polite and loyal to Megatron. Dreadwing hated the Autobots and wanted the Decepticon cause to be led right. Those two count, we just don't know where all these slaves and gladiators went. They are split up and either fighting on Cybertron or somewhere else in the universe, and Megatron is too obsessed with killing Optimus to gather the army like Starscream thought he would at the start of the show.
Shall I ready the space bridge to bring forth the Decepticon army you have surely gathered during your 3 years in space?
Autobots and Decepticons are both good and bad people. Autobots have done questionable things like laugh at killing Vehicons, try to use a spark nuke on the Decepticon army, actually using the spark nuke on a bunch of Vehicons, torture a Vehicon, were willing to torture Soundwave very quickly after he trolled them.
Tell us what Megatron is attempting to build, before we are forced to rely upon less civil methods of interrogation.
Left Starscream to get crushed, knowing that Megatron wanted to kill him and wasn't likely going to save him. Wanted to leave Starscream injured and alone until he provided information. Kill Starscream in cold blood without knowing it was a clone. Suggests to place a bomb on a minicon to kill Soundwave. And in the comics, Airwave killed fellow Autobots to drink their blood in a period of starvation. Even at times Optimus slips. That's fine that they aren't perfect. We the audience and readers just need to understand that the Autobots aren't the clear good guys. Decepticons aren't necessarily bad guys, and a large number of them are rightfully angry and violent, but good people. A big mistake makes them look bad. They tried to create more dark energon to use as a strength-enhancing drug in battle. They accidentally damaged Primus doing that, but what the fans weren't understanding is that the Decepticons did not intentionally go out to hurt their creator. Why would they want to do that and stop Cybertron from producing energon in life? They messed up under a crazy leader, but that does not mean their cause was flawed from the start. One of Optimus's doubts in his cause is that they fought when they shouldn't have. He wonders if the Autobot faction is extending an unnecessary war. This is an incredibly valid thought, because what if they let Megatron usurp the government? Megatron was very much interested in change and rights at the time. He turned nuts when Optimus claimed his own faction of the Autobots, and these Autobots, the high caste and the middle caste, started fighting these already oppressed people. The Autobots aggravated the slaves and fueled the fire by killing bots they had been taking advantage of for so long. If the slaves were wronged first, they were seeking revenge, but when a Decepticon kills an Autobot, another Autobot wants revenge for the death of their friend. They called the Decepticons evil, then killed them in revenge. That infuriated the Decepticon, who is friends with that bot who got killed by Autobots. They think, holy crap, these Autobots oppressed us, they're murdering us, and now they're calling us evil when we fight back. This is the essence of the Decepticon cause. This is what we see in a specific scene in the Beast Hunters comics, which are very good by the way, darker than the show. Slug the Dinobot comes across a bot who has been crushed. This bot calls out for help when he hears Slug, only for Slug to realize it's a Forged, a Decepticon loyal to Shockwave, and Slug turns his back. The Decepticon cries out for Slug to not leave him like this, and Slug asks where the rest of the Con's unit is. This Decepticon is Blackout. He is confused but says there is no unit, only a settlement of Decepticons living together. Blackout says they all died, not other soldiers, but his friends. He challenges the Autobot. He assumes the Autobot thinks he is evil and doesn't have friends. Blackout thinks the Autobots are evil, tells him to piss off because his friends, the bad guys, wouldn't have made him beg. Blackout and Dreadwing demonstrate how Decepticons don't see Autobots the way a Transformers Prime viewer sees them. Slug asks Sludge to fix him so he can survive for his trial. The Decepticon thinks it will be an unfair trial, that they'll try him for being a Decepticon basically because they see that as a crime. He also thinks the Autobots will sentence him to death. You would think Optimus would never allow that. Of course he wouldn't. But we have seen Autobots execute Decepticons before. Earlier in the series, Kickback is murdered after he's no longer able to fight. Autobots and Transformers Prime were willing to kill defeated opponents, such as Wheeljack and Soundwave, when Wheeljack could have maimed him or tried to capture him instead. Autobots aren't like Optimus and need reminders, such as RC, so Blackout is justified to assume Autobots might execute him. Slug carries the Decepticon on his back and they get into a deep conversation you can now fully understand. Blackout says that the Decepticons were not known as a League of Evil when they started. Once, both sides had the same goal. Slug takes the Autobot stance, says the Decepticons became evil when they started blowing up places while Optimus was making negotiations with the High Council. Blackout interrupts, arguing that Optimus's negotiations weren't ever going to work because the High Casts weren't going to give up their privilege just talking. Blackout still does not regret being a Decepticon, but he regrets that the war dragged on and everyone suffered. They both admit that nowadays they only keep fighting to keep their own group from starving by letting the other faction take all the energon. The Autobot and Decepticon end up sitting down, and the Decepticon asks if Primus is punishing them. Getting real philosophical now. Then the Decepticon passes away and leaves Slug with this new understanding of the Decepticons. It is a very good story within the comics that nails both sides, definitely a must read. Of course Decepticons have friends, Transformers Prime cons are pricks, but even MacLeod in Retribution talks about Decepticons who suffer when they lose people close to them. Remember Team Prime being a family. According to MacLeod, Decepticons have families too. Too often in the Transformers Prime fandom, people slander the Decepticons as bots who slaughtered innocents. The higher caste bots were far from innocent, and you know that when you look into the lore of this show. All this research is what goes into my story game for YouTube, Mercy, when I write the Decepticons and Autobots coming into conflict as they rebuild Cybertron. I prepared this video to ready everyone, and I hope you take it easy on those poor Decepticons now.